So welcome everybody. I hope you're enjoying the conference. My name is Josh Rockey. I'm the lead faculty for communication courses at Colorado Technical University, and really thrilled to be here again. And this is my, I don't know, fourth or fifth year presenting. I think our third, fourth. I don't know how many, but I really enjoy this conference and hope you're having a good experience here as well. And this session, I'm really looking forward to talking to you about this idea of homegrown talent, right? Creating a culture of retention. This is something that I've been working on for a number of years. I've been using for a number of years. In addition to working in higher ed, I do some consulting. My background is organizational communication, so I consult with organizations on a variety of different communication related areas. And as part of that, I've developed this larger, I don't know if I call it a system. That sounds pretty formal, but this kind of thing that I call tell your story. I help organizations tell their story, and I help them tell it to themselves. I help them tell it internally. I help them tell it externally. And part of that, though, this is really the homegrown talent system is kind of part of the that telling your story internally and helping employees understand who you are and what you're about, what that culture is of that organization, and as a result, then helping them feel a part of that and helping it feel like home to them, which is really where that the home part of it comes from. Is we want, a lot of times at C2, our dean would say, we want this to be your educational home for our adjunct faculty. We want this to feel as comfortable as home. We want this to be your safe spot, whatever, however you want to phrase it. So that's kind of what we're going to get into today. So really, one of the greatest inefficiencies in organizations that I've found in my experience is the loss that comes from employee turnover. How much intellectual capital, institutional knowledge, and necessary skill simply walks out the door, right? How much time then, energy, and capital does it take to regain those losses then on our part too, as managers and leaders? It's a very high opportunity cost going about replacing all of that skill and knowledge that walks out the door so we can bring somebody else in. And in my mind, a huge inefficiency. Now, we can never avoid turnover altogether. People are going to leave, and that's okay. But we can help minimize those losses and retain our valuable human resources if we kind of engage in some of the steps of this process. So it's for that reason that I kind of came up with this, what I call the home model, right? And this session is going to introduce you to that home model, which is designed to create the foundation of an organizational culture that makes people want to stick around, that generates a better return on the enormous investment in your people, and that keeps your best homegrown talent at home, ideally. So again, there are four kind of steps to this model, four factors in this model, and as you might guess, it's kind of an acronym here. So H is for hire the right people. We'll break each of these down individually then and go a little deeper into these. But H is for hire the right people. O is onboard with culture in mind. M is maximize skills via training. And then E is equip leaders and be thinking about, proactively equipping leaders. So again, we're gonna break down each of these elements and talk about what we mean by each of these things, and then collectively, the idea is that if we're successful in accomplishing these things, then our people are going to feel more at home. Okay? Now, my belief is that the H may be the most important part of this whole process, which is hire the right people. And that may sound really simplistic, but oftentimes we just, especially when the economy is good and people aren't having difficulty finding jobs, we get in that habit of just, bringing in any warm body. That's what we used to say. We bring in any warm body to this job, but any warm body is not going to get the job done and not going to stick around. And we're going to end up, again, putting resources into this person that just walk out the door because they don't stick, right? So we've got to hire the right people. And to do that, we first need to think about skill set. That's crucially important. We need people who can do the job that we need them to do, that have the skills and the ability to do that job. So obviously we need to identify what those things are, and that's in our job description. I'm sure your HR folks and your HR department can attest to that we have job descriptions for that reason. So we identify these skills, but then we got to match people up with that skill set. Got to find people who have those skills, right? So that's number one. When we're hiring people, we're looking for people, we have to make sure that they have the skill set that we need. But just as importantly, we need to consider disposition and personality of that person. Right? How are they going to fit into our organization? How are they going to think about the team that they're going to be working on? How are they going to get along with those people? Or are they going to be, a positive addition to that team, or is it going to become a distraction? Can you foresee some clashes? We just need to be able to anticipate those things a little bit and find somebody who seems to have the right disposition and personality, right? Um, one of the things we talk about in organizational culture is that every organization has a culture. And you really need to, it's almost like a good marriage or a good friendship. You got to find people who fit with that culture. And if you have somebody who's very rigid in their mindset and in their thinking and they want a really rigid schedule. They want to clock in at this time and clock out at this time and we want to do this job and that's it. But you have an organization that's more of what we call like a clan culture where people are interacting a lot and engaging and things are a little more fluid and then that you got to think about those things. Does this person have the right disposition and the right personality to fit in well with our team without um, if you're a sports person, you think about that too. Somebody who's good in the locker room, right? We hear sports broadcasters say this person's really good in the locker room. They're kind of the glue of the team. Maybe they're not the all-star, maybe that, but they're a good team person. They bring things together. You want that. You want people who are going to get along with your team. So think about, and trying to anticipate as you're interviewing and hiring people, how are they going to fit in terms of their disposition and their personality? We do need to think, I kind of touched on this, we need to think about our own organizational culture and how we can match then people up with that. Again, if we think about the different types of organizational cultures, they're very different. I won't go into detail about what all this is, but hierarchical organizational culture is very rigid, right? This is more what you see in um, uh, almost like a factory or a manufacturing type place where, again, you got people clocking in at a certain time, they clock out at a certain time, they come in, they do this very specific job, and then they go, as opposed to like a clan culture, which is more interactive. It thrives on engagement and sharing ideas and fluidity of roles and things. So you got to find somebody who's going to be comfortable in that kind of system, right? And so again, understanding your own organizational culture is a great place to start. What kind of organization do you have? And then you can try and match up what that person, how that person might fit in or whether they would fit in and start to think about that. So again, we're adding that to skill set. Obviously, it starts with somebody who can perform that job, has the skills to do that job. But then we think beyond that. We broaden that. And how are they going to match up with our organizational culture with their own disposition and personality? Then the final aspect of hire the right people is you have to refuse to settle. And that could be the most difficult part, especially if you have a need for staffing. The inclination is, well, this person's, you know, they're good enough. I hate that expression as far as hiring people and bringing new people onto your team. Good enough is not enough. Good enough is never enough. You have to refuse to sell. You have to be patient and wait for that right pairing, wait for that right person to come along. I would rather be short-staffed. My philosophy is I would rather be short-staffed to a certain extent. Obviously, you need people, but I would rather be short-staffed than have somebody who's not going to be a good fit because that's just going to disrupt everything else. So you have to refuse. You have to be patient, refuse to settle, and that may mean some hardships as we go along. But in the short term, but in the long term, when you find that right person, everything's gonna work out so much better. And so we just have to be patient and refuse to settle for good enough. Good enough is not enough. We've got to find just the right person for that role. And, if you're familiar with the Good to Great series, the author's name is leaving me right now, but I love their analogy of you got to get the right people on the bus, right? First, it starts with getting the right people on the bus, then you get them in the right seat on that bus. But it starts with getting the right people on the bus. And so being picky is a good thing in my opinion. When you're bringing new people onto the team, you have to think about how it's going to impact the rest of the team and the rest of the system because there will be a ripple effect. So don't settle. So again, we start with hiring the right people, getting the right people on the bus, bringing the right people into our organization, and that's where this whole thing begins. I want to pause for a second because I meant to say at the beginning. Feel free to jump in at any time if you have questions. We use the chat or whatever. That would be great. I love questions at any time, so don't hesitate to throw your question in the chat or let somebody know you have a question. I'll be happy to take those at any time and take a breath and pause at any time. Okay. Okay. Having said that, hiring the right people is a critical first step. That's the H. Then we can move on to the O. Once we hire these people, we have to onboard them, right? We have to get them prepared. And that, is more than just getting them an ID and showing them their desk and then dropping them off. Onboarding needs to be a longer term process, and it needs to happen with culture in mind, with the culture of the organization, because we're not only teaching them their job and getting them acclimated with their job, we're getting them acclimated with the entire organization and kind of how we do things and all these unwritten things. So onboarding is the time that we do that. And I like to think of onboarding as a 90-day process. And I kind of break it down. First day, things that need to happen on the first day, then things that need to happen in the first 2 weeks, then things that need to happen, overall, what needs to happen in those first 90 days. Those first 90 days are critical. Okay, so that's kind of how I break this down in my mind. And again, all of this needs to have the culture of the organization in mind and should be geared toward helping them understand that. So if we think about onboarding, the first day, one of the things we need to emphasize is we want to emphasize culture over the technical aspects. There's going to be lots of time to teach them all the details of their job and all the, little tiny things. This first day is just about getting them acclimated to the organization. So we need to emphasize culture over the technical aspects and just, kind of how does this place function? How does it work? What are the expectations? Just get them comfortable being there on site, or if you're working remotely, just get them, comfortable with who they're going to be working with and what they're going to be doing in general. And there's time to get to the details, but that first day is overwhelming. They're not going to remember all the details anyway, probably that first day. So just focus on culture, emphasize culture over the technical aspects. In addition, on that first day, send out the welcome wagon. Meet them as soon as they hit the door. You don't want them, standing at the door for 20 minutes trying to figure out where to go or who to talk to. You ought to know that somebody ought to know that they're coming in and be there to greet them when they walk in the door. And make them feel then welcome, make them feel like, yes, we're expecting you. We can't wait for you to join our team. We're ready for you. That will set the stage for that. If you or somebody from the team can meet them as soon as they arrive and just send out the welcome wagon. You don't have to have the whole team come because that could be a little intimidating, but at least send one person out there to meet them when they come in and to help them get started then. You do that day, I think, want to introduce them to the team. I like to introduce people to the team, and not really in depth, but just, the people that they're going to be working closely with, get them around. It may take them some time to learn the names, but at least they'll have seen the faces and get to know them a little. You can introduce them to the environment in general. By that, I mean, where are the bathrooms? Where's the copy machine? Where's the coffee maker? That's important to me. Where are these things? And, how do you get in and out? If there's security codes or whatever, how do you get in and out of these places? Just kind of walk them around, give them a tour of the facility or a tour of what people do in general, and just kind of introduce them to the vibe of the organization, and give them a sense of, is this a really serious, quiet workplace, or is this, a place where we kind of joke around with each other? What's the vibe of this workplace? And just kind of introduce them to those things. Introduce them to the team, the environment, the vibe, and just kind of let them settle in a little bit and get to know you and the organization a little bit, and how things are going to look. And this is important too. You need to be prepared for when they come in. Have things ready to go for them. Have their workstation ready. Have any technology ready for them. Have a schedule in mind, that kind of thing, and just show them that you're prepared, that you anticipated them coming. And again, this will help them feel like they're wanted. That you took the time to prepare for them to be there, and that you have things ready to go for them on that first day. That will send a message that again that you're wanted. They're wanted. You're excited to have them there, and so just be prepared for them to arrive in general with those, just the basics. The basic things. Again, have a place for them to sit. If it's on site, have a place for them to sit and show them where they're going to be working and that kind of thing. So be prepared. Okay? So those are kind of first day things. Just kind of, again, let them settle in. Don't hit them with all these, details and that kind of stuff. Just let them kind of get the feel for the place, and that's my feeling anyways, because it can be a little overwhelming. So give them that first day to just kind of settle in. Then you want to think about the first 2 weeks, right? What do we expect from people? What do we expect them to do, and what do we expect to happen in those first 2 weeks? First, we want to give them kind of an idea of what the role framework is, what their job is overall. Again, you can start getting into details here, but about the job, but they ought to have a very clear idea of what is their function and how does that work within the team? Where do they sit within the larger organization? Why is their function important? And how does it, where is it situated in the workflow process of the entire organization? And it's important to know. It's important for that person, I think, to know that, to know what they're dependent on. Are they dependent on other people for information that's feeding into their job? And who are they feeding? What is their work impacting, and who's waiting on their product, so to speak, or their output? But just give them an idea of what the job is. They ought to know some, obviously, but and where it sits in the organization, how it impacts other people, and that kind of thing. You can also start getting into job training, of course, those first 2 weeks. You can start showing them this is your job specifically. This is what we expect you to do, and these are the tasks that we are looking to you to accomplish. So you can start getting into the job training, and that would make sense. Don't overlook system training as part of this too. Every organization, especially now with as much technology as we use, has an abundance of systems, right? So they're going to need to know, how do you get logged into your computer? Our organization at CTU, we have all kinds of data dashboards and things like that, and it's wonderful. We have access to all kinds of data on everything imaginable, and but it can be confusing. You got to. Fortunately, I had wonderful colleagues who walked me through and how to use it initially, and then because it all went straight over my head, I knew they were there to answer questions that I had after that. I could go to them and say, I can't find this data that I'm looking for. Where do I look for this? And they're going to need system training, even if it's just, what's the code for the copier? If you have a copier code, what is it? How do you use all this stuff? And what are we expected to use? And of course, I work remotely, so we also then have, systems like we use Microsoft Teams a lot, Microsoft 365. I use Google Drive for some things. And how do we use those systems? How do we use Zoom? My college, college allotted Zoom account. How does that work? All these things, all these systems, don't overlook those things because it can be pretty confusing when you get lost in the technology. So be sure that you allot some time for system training as well and help them get to know the systems there. Then also in the first 2 weeks, you want to think about targeted relationship building. I said the first day you just want to introduce people on the team. That's great. Introduce everybody, introduce them to the front office staff, introduce them to the facility staff, introduce them to everybody, right? That's great. But in these first 2 weeks, you also want to focus on that targeted relationship building. Who are the team members that this person is going to be working closely with? And start to, eh, help them get to know those other people. Don't just expect that it will happen over time. I mean, it might over time, but have some idea of how you can help initiate those interactions. And again, this is not, you don't have to expect them to be best friends with everybody. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, if I'm working closely with this person, how to get to know, how do I get a hold of them? How do we communicate? What are they like? And what's the best way for me to communicate with them? And exactly what tasks are we sharing or are dependent on one another? So start some of that targeted team building with both the team members internally, and also if you have any external stakeholders, if this person is going to be working with clients or working with external vendors or something like that, anybody outside of the organization, if it's going to be part of their job to work with somebody like that on a regular basis, you ought to initiate helping them develop that relationship, starting that relationship and getting to know that person. And again, how do they work with one another? And so and I have a plan for that as well. So doing some targeted relationship building is part of those first 2 weeks as well. Okay, so now we get the first 2 weeks. I think the first day absolutely critical. It sets the tone for everything, right? First impressions are critical and can set the tone for everything. Then the first 2 weeks really establish what this person is going to do on a day-to-day basis and who they're going to be working with on a regular basis and help them get comfortable with those tasks primarily, right? But then as we think about the first 90 days, again, I think about the first 90 days kind of holistically then in a sense, but I kind of break it down into 30-day segments, right? The first 90 days, or sorry, the first 30 of those 90 days is really all about learning. It's about learning about the company culture, learning the job expectations, what specifically are they going to be expected to do and how do they do it? It's about training. So learning through training on how to do those tasks and setting them up for success by showing them exactly how to do those things and be successful with those things. And then maybe some shadowing opportunities if they're going to be working again with other departments or other people, it might be nice for them to shadow those people for a little while just to see what they do. Not that they have to learn that job, but then they can understand more fully how does my job impact this and what's the overall process there. Those are things that you can do in the first 30 days. Again, you don't have to overload them so much just with, you know, minute by minute expectations of their specific job, but you can give them a broader picture. They can learn about the organization, they can learn about the culture, they can learn about their own job and the jobs of others and how those impact one another. So the first 30 days is all about learning. The next 30 days then is about contributing. How can this person increase their team collaboration? How do they fit in? In other words, how can they work with others that are on the team effectively? And what's the best way for them to do that? It's about contributing through deepening their role specific skills. So really digging into their job. So again, this is the days 31 to 60. They're really, they've got maybe an understanding of what their job is. Now they can start figuring out, okay, what do I bring to the table here specifically? And they can deepen that role specific skills, those role specific skills so that they can really thrive in their job then. Okay, and really start to get a handle on their own work and what they bring specifically to that role. And then, allowing them during that second 30 days to complete some manageable projects. And again, I try not to use too many sports analogies here, but I think a lot about, when a quarterback is struggling or you have a new quarterback on a football team and you're not sure how they're going to perform, a lot of times they'll start them off. They won't start them off with huge deep passes, right? And complicated routes. They'll start them off with little short passes to the running back or to the tight end or somebody that's just, much more manageable to give them some confidence. Right. And once they get that confidence, yeah, they get a couple completions, they start feeling good about themselves. Then you start throwing some different routes and different passes and things. The same thing is true for new team members. You can give them some smaller, manageable projects that they can complete and do well, and will help give them that confidence in that 30 to 60 day period where they're just figuring out where they sit in the organization and how they can best contribute. But they can help them build that confidence by giving them a couple of small projects and helping them complete a couple of manageable things during that time. So once we get through the first 60 days, then we get into that last set of 30 days. It really becomes then about owning. Those final 30 days ought to be about owning. This is where we ought to look to that person to start to own and take ownership of key responsibilities, that they have in their own job, whatever that job is, that framework, that role is, that they take on ownership of those key responsibilities and start taking ownership of getting these things done, understanding that it's their job to get those things done, right? It also could involve, encouraging them to make some independent decisions. Kind of empowering them to say, okay, this is now your role. So you need to make some of these decisions and be more independent in this. Now that they've got their legs under them a little bit, they can hopefully start to make some of their own decisions as part of that role. And then you start, as well as in these last 30 days, to establish longer term goals. Again, they got their feet under themselves a little bit. They have the basics of their job down. So what are their longer term goals? What do you expect to see from them in the next 6 months, in the next year, in the next 5 years? And establish some longer term goals that they can shoot for, especially now that they've got a couple of those manageable projects under their belt. They've got some confidence and can start to think longer term. And that's good in a couple of ways. It's good for that job, obviously, in a task sense, that they start thinking about what's going to be necessary in the next, in the longer term sense, but also getting them to think, yeah, I want to be here longer term. I want to be here in the long run. So what are my goals here within that organization? And start getting them to think about that. Yeah, and think about themselves as a long-term employee here. Um, so this first 90 days are again broken down, and the first 30 ought to be about learning. Then in the second 30, start to think about, how can we help them feel like they're contributing and get them contributing and gain some confidence through that. And then in the last 90 days, we start to turn over some of this stuff more completely and say, okay, now this is your responsibility. We're kind of taking off the training wheels and you're going to be responsible for these things overall. Okay, so first day, 2 weeks, 90 days, all of this with culture in mind, all of this, again, helping them to acclimate to who you are as an organization and bringing them along slowly, helping them feel like they're fitting in and that they're contributing, and then that they can take ownership and start to see themselves in a longer term role in this organization. Okay, so onboarding. We talked about hiring the right people. Now we talked about onboarding with culture in mind. The next step is maximizing skills with training. I am a huge proponent of training. Again, I'm biased. I've come from a background of organizational development and organizational communication. And this is really my background is training and things. So obviously, I'm a huge fan of training, but I think there's a lot of value in training. If we expect people to do these things, we got to teach them how, right? So first, though, first and foremost, they have a primary role and responsibilities that we have to train them on. We got to provide them. If we expect them to do this job well, we need to train them on how to do it. We need to give them the resources that they need in order to do so before we expect them to do something, right? They need that foundation. So that's our first focus is helping someone understand what is your primary role here. What are your responsibilities and what are the expectations that go with that? And give them the opportunity to feel really comfortable with that before we start expecting other things from them. But we ought to place a premium on helping them feel good about, having a mastery of that role. Once that happens, though, we can start to think about how can we cross-train some people on some different things. We can cross-train some of these skills and roles. That can be extremely valuable. So that if you have people moving to a different role in the organization, then they may have an understanding of how it works and have a head start there. If you have somebody who's out, sick or whatever on vacation or something, and you need somebody to help kind of fill in a little bit there, that cross training can be really important. It can also be really important just again in having an understanding of what other areas of the organization do, what other people do in that organization. Having that knowledge can be really helpful in seeing the whole picture and help you understand more where your role fits in and how you can do it better to help that other person to set them up for success. Right. So, but we can start to cross train people and keep people sharp too. The more we train people, the more it keeps them sharp and so it's just a valuable process overall. Cross training people on different skills and helping them develop different skills then as a result as they see these different roles. Next up, we need to also provide training for soft skills in the workplace. Oftentimes, we expect people to come in with these things, but the reality is these are not always natural skills. Certainly not for all people. Some people may be stronger in some areas than others, but these are not really natural skills. These are things that we learn by training, by being taught these things. Okay, so things like communication and teamwork and creativity and adaptability and problem solving, we can provide training and development on these things and help people improve. Okay. It can also be helpful in identifying, who wants to do these things, who's going to take the time to do this, and that can be helpful in the last part, with equipping leaders and identifying leaders, people who really want to improve their teamwork skills or improve their problem solving. Those are the people we want in those leadership positions. So seeing who takes advantage of these things can be helpful as well. But we ought to offer people the opportunity to improve these skills, and we ought to make it a priority for us to do so as an organization. That ought to be part of our organizational culture. This kind of continuous improvement for people, and specifically on those soft skills that are important for the workplace that we all know are really crucial for people in the workplace, regardless of what their job is. The final one, maybe a stretch for some people to see, but I think personal development is a really important one. And by this, I don't mean necessarily even, again, soft skills for the workplace are one thing. I'm talking here about just helping people grow as people. We can offer a class. It doesn't matter we can offer classes in gardening. You can offer a class, or whatever, just an opportunity for personal development in that way. Our CTU has volunteer hours, which I would also put into this category. We have a certain amount of we can take time off. We get paid time off to volunteer at different organizations, and then we report that, and that's part of our expectations as employees that we give back to the community and things. So, but I see that as personal development as well for me, and the ways we engage in those things. But even if it's just again a class on what it doesn't matter what if a class on ballroom dancing doesn't well if people are interested in that then yeah let's do it is it really going to hurt to take an hour and give people a chance to learn how to do a little ballroom dancing or to engage in a craft project every once in a while, is it really going to kill our productivity? Probably not going to kill it, but it is going to help them develop and even if that skill is not specifically related to their job or to our organization, it's helping them develop a growth mindset, right? This idea that they can still grow and learn. It also just is encouraging for employees when organizations take an interest in them and just say, look, we appreciate you. We want to give you this time to just kind of learn something new if you want to. Doesn't have to be a requirement. I'm not interested in gardening. My wife does that. I'm not interested in gardening. The most I do with that is water the plants. That's my job, is to water everything. But so I probably wouldn't go to a class on gardening or ballroom dancing for that matter, but other people would. And so it just sends a message from the organization that, look, we care about you. We want you to enjoy life. The happier you are, the happier people are with their lives, the happier they're probably going to be at work too. If they, as long as they don't hate their job, but so there's some benefit, I would say, to engaging in some personal development as well. Again, it doesn't need to be, 8 hours a week. An hour every month or an hour every quarter would be plenty. But just invest in your people as people and allow them to continue to grow in ways that they want to, even if it's not directly related to their job or to your organization. I think that can be helpful as well. So, but we can mobilize these people and we can maximize their skills via training. And if we're going to expect people to do a job well and to continuously improve in different things and to help our organization grow, then it's our responsibility to give them the resources to do so, to give them the opportunity to do so, and hopefully take advantage of those things then. Okay. So we can maximize a lot of skills via training, I think. And that's an important part of retention. And I think organizations that send that message that they are committed to training, they are committed to the development of people in their jobs and even outside of their jobs, again, sends a strong message to people and makes them want to be a part of that organization, an organization that recognizes the importance of those things. Okay, the last part of the home structure here is to equip leaders. And by that I do mean equip leaders. Again, this leadership is not always a natural skill. Even people who are kind of, quote unquote, natural born leaders aren't necessarily good leaders, right? They may have the personality for that, but that doesn't mean they have the skills to do it. And this, because those skills are learned, right? And on the flip side, somebody who may not consider themselves a born leader or whatever may think, well, I'm too shy, I'm too introverted, I'm not really a leader, but maybe they are if they develop those skills. Not every leader has to be this really extroverted, outgoing, boisterous person. Leaders come in all different shapes and sizes and styles, and so it's important for us as an organization to equip those leaders, and in doing so, again, help them become more invested in our organization. This is all about retention, right? We want them to be invested in our organization, and we do that by helping them become the most that they can be. So, first stop in equipping leaders, in my mind, and this is a critically important one, is first ask if they want to lead. Right? Not everybody wants to be a leader. Some people are quite comfortable being followers, and that's fine. You need followers as well. You need people who are good followers. So not everybody has to be a leader, and not everybody wants to be a leader. And it may be that maybe they just don't want to be a leader right now. Maybe they've got enough stuff going on in their job or at home or whatever, and they just don't want to take on that responsibility right now. So either way, whether it's just in general or whether it's just a situational thing where they don't want to do it right now, we ought to ask if they want to lead instead of just throwing somebody into a leadership position and expecting them to do that. We need to confirm that they want to. So at some point along the line, it's important for us to just have a conversation about, where do you see yourself? Is this something would that be something you're interested in at some point? If an opportunity came up, I'll frame it that way a lot of times when I'm talking to people that work with me. I'll say, I don't know of anything right now, but if something were to come up, would you be interested in that? Should I have your name in mind if somebody comes to me and says, hey, we're looking for somebody to lead this effort or take on this project? Should I have your name on my list and in my mind, or not? And that's okay too. That's okay too, if that's where they're at right at that moment. So, but we need to ask if they want to lead and be sure that that's something they're interested in. We also want to provide training then. Again, going back to maximizing via training, leadership is a skill. Even experienced leaders, even good leaders have room to improve, and that's a skill set that we need to work on, right? It's not, again, even if you feel like you have the natural characteristics of a leader, there are still skills involved in leadership that don't just come naturally to us that we need to learn. So as an organization, if we're going to ask people to lead, then we ought to teach them how to lead effectively and what that looks like. So we can provide training and help people develop as leaders, even if they're not in a leadership position right now. I've had that plenty of times too, that we're preparing leaders for that eventuality. even if there's not a situation right now where they're leading, but we can provide that training and have them in a better position to be prepared to do so when the opportunity does come. Right. So we can provide training. We can ask them if they want to lead. If they raise their hand and say, "Yeah, I'd like to lead sometime, or I'd like to lead now," then we can start to prepare them by providing training and continuing to provide that training even as we have leaders and as they become leaders. Um, Another thing we can do to equip leaders is to provide a sneak peek. We can again go back to job shadowing or something like that. We can say, okay, I want you to spend a day with the person in a leadership position, right? And in a college, there's lots of people like that, and I've had again wonderful, outstanding leadership in colleges that have allowed me to do this. And it's really helpful to see what somebody else does just in general, but it was also very helpful to me as much as anything in knowing what I don't want to do, what I'm not interested in the sense of like I shadowed a guy who I had a lot of respect for, still a lot of respect for, and really I developed a good relationship with as a person. But he was the director of financial aid, and I am not a financial aid person. I'm not really a numbers person overall. Like that's not my really favorite part. And then financial aid is so complicated. It's so important, so important to have somebody outstanding in that position and in all the financial aid positions, but because it's really complicated and there's a lot of rules and regulations and stuff. And I spent a day with him, and it was enough for me to understand that's not what I want. You know what I mean? I'm not interested in that. And that's valuable too. As a developing leader, it's just as valuable to know what I don't want as to know what I do want. But then I also had the opportunity to shadow other people. I mean, the chancellor that we had at that institution was really wonderful about identifying leaders and then saying, "Why don't you check this out, check that out, and we'll see, what you think you're good at and what you're not so good at, what you're interested in, and not so interested in." But you can provide a sneak peek of what that looks like and what that responsibility is like by allowing them to kind of shadow or be around other leaders, even just to chat with somebody for an hour. I had an opportunity to do that one time. I was in a leadership training program, and we had to meet with some of the senior leadership of the institution, not just like people above. This person was like 7 levels above me, right? It was the vice president of this area, and it was really fascinating to meet with that person and see what they do, and just discuss and just chat about leadership with them in general was fantastic. So, but we can provide a sneak peek at what that's like, and again, they'll learn more about as much about what they don't want or don't like as what they do like, and maybe even that it's not for them in general right now. So, but again, and with that in mind, that kind of goes to the last part. We need to also provide not just an on ramp for these experiences, for these leadership opportunities, but we have to provide an off ramp as well. If you have somebody that comes in and does all this, they go through the training, they shadow somebody, get a peek at what it is, and they just decide this isn't for me right now, either right now or at all, and that's fine. I mean, if you've heard of the Peter principle, right, is that people are oftentimes raised to the point of their own inability. So, to paraphrase that, meaning that somebody's really good at their job, and I've seen this quite a bit too. Somebody's really good at their job, and then they get promoted as a result of being really good at their job, but those same skills don't necessarily translate to a leadership position, and then they falter and we lose them, right? So if you get into that situation where somebody's either in a leadership position or they're examining that and they just see it's not for them, we should provide them with the opportunity to say, look, I need to take a step back and maybe not, this is not for me. But you don't necessarily want to lose that person overall. Probably the reason that they were promoted to that leadership position is because they were really good at something. So we ought to give them an opportunity to go back to being really good at that something if possible, so we don't totally lose their institutional knowledge, their inherent skill set and all that kind of stuff. So we ought to be thinking about making it clear to people that there's an on-ramp here. We want to equip you as a leader if you want to do that and maybe look at leadership opportunities, even if it's not a promotion to a senior position, even if it's just, leading a project or leading a team of some sort in some special event or something. We ought to provide opportunities for that to have people volunteer for that and look for those opportunities. But we also have to offer that off ramp. We ought to be thinking about, okay, what if this doesn't work? What if this person's not interested in this and they find out, then we don't want to totally lose them altogether. And that's a very real possibility. Okay. So that was very quickly. There you have it. That's your introduction to the home model, which is again designed to create the foundation of an organizational culture that makes people want to stick around, that generates a better return on the enormous investment that we make in our people, and that keeps our best homegrown talent here at home. Right? It is important that we not confuse employee satisfaction with employee coddling. We don't want to necessarily go that far, but investing in your team members can go a long way in the battle to retain that intellectual capital, institutional knowledge, and necessary skills that keep the wheels moving in your organization. And it can also help us as leaders and managers. It can help us avoid time, energy, and capital that is required to recover from such losses of those people. So creating a culture of retention oftentimes may not show up as a line item in the budget. You may not see it there, but the benefits will be clear in the operational health and productivity of your organization, I think. So, um, all right, that's what I have for you. This is my email on here, just jrockey@coloradotech.edu. I'd be happy to answer any questions or talk about any of this that people wish to. I'm also happy to answer questions or share any resources if you want to email me, I'd be happy to do any of that at any time. And but otherwise, I hope there was at least one nugget of good information here for you. And I thank you for your time today. But any questions or anything anybody wants to add or chat about?
Thanks so much, Josh. This was really a insightful session. To me, I learned a lot about how that onboarding process can really be helpful to retain. And I think what really spoke to me was your ending portion, where you talked about providing those leadership opportunities. And I like how you really noted that onboarding ramp. So not jumping straight to an opportunity, but testing it out, see if that's something that would not only interest the person, but that they could be skilled at and succeed in, because you would hate to lose someone who's really great at their position, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And Christine, this kind of goes to your question as well. Christine asked if I have any suggestions for succession planning, and yeah, my first suggestion is start early, identify people along the road, even, well before these opportunities exist. You can, again, identify who may be a good prospect for leadership, and you can talk to them about that and kind of get them started on the idea of that. And then it's just a matter of trying to, kind of like I was talking about with hiring people, it's a matter of just kind of matching people with the right opportunity. And do they have the right disposition? Do they have the right skill set? Obviously, that starts with that. But then do they have the right disposition, knowing the team that they're going to be leading? Do they seem like they'd be a good fit there without complete disruption? And they ought to have their own freedom and discretion to lead how they want to lead. But you also want to think about, and have somebody come in and just totally destroy the morale of that team because it's not a good fit. And anyway, so I'd start, but I think, starting early, even before those opportunities exist, starting to plant the seed of the idea of leadership in the mind of those people. Again, some people are going to be like raring to go, and they're ready. They're ready to lead. They want to do that, whether they're actually ready or not. But in their mind, they're ready. But some people may need a little time to develop the confidence to be able to lead in general. So, yeah, I think, for example, one institution that I was at, this chancellor was, again, really did a great job of developing leaders, I think, and identifying leaders. But he created what he called the book club, the chancellor's book club, and he invited a group of us, and he did this a number of times, but he invited a number of us to. There would be probably 10 people that would meet with him early. He was a morning. He's a farmer, so he was a morning person. So we'd meet early in the morning before work or whatever, and just talk about this book and just go through it. But part of that process for him was, okay, who's gonna be able to speak up? Who's doing the work? Who's showing up? Who's speaking up? Who's really, gathering an idea here? Who's got some insightful, suggestions in terms of what they caught from the reading? And then he would challenge us every once in a while. I remember one of these meetings, I thought I was going to get fired because he was pretty strong-willed, and people were not. We knew not to really. It was hard to challenge him sometimes because he was so set on things, right? but he said something that I knew was totally wrong, and I knew he didn't believe. Right. But he was challenging us. I came to understand that he was challenging us to see who would be willing to speak up. And I did. I said, no, I disagree with you there. I said it in a nice way, but I still thought, oh my God, this is going to get me fired because I'm disagreeing with the chancellor on this, and I'm going to end up getting fired for saying this. But I said, and he said, you're right. And he told us he was just challenging us to see who would kind of speak up and to give us the idea that sometimes we need to speak up when we know something's wrong. And that was a tough lesson to learn, but and that was well before any of us got promoted or he was developing us very early on, if that makes sense. So I don't know if that answers your question, Christine, but I think starting early, identifying people, and then again getting that, planting that seed with them for um, do I want to lead, and I do have what it takes, and starting to help them build that confidence before the opportunity even comes around, and they get thrown into that position. And then again, as you do that, you can start to identify and maybe match skill sets and personalities and things with potential opportunities, and just kind of play a what if game sometimes, right? What if we had an opening in this role? Do we have anybody who could fill that? And start thinking about, okay, what skill set and what personality will we need? And do we have anybody that kind of matches that? And just, as an intellectual exercise, just kind of playing the what if game. But that's kind of how I approach succession planning, is just to kind of start early and see what you're working with, and then trying to start to match those things up a little bit. Uh, I
And
hope
we
that
had
answers
just
some of your
a
questions.
couple
Yeah,
minutes left, so I wanted to point out that we do have a session evaluation pinned in the chat. If you wouldn't mind providing some feedback, that'd be great for the ELK team. But Hannah also had a question on
yeah,
advice that you might have, Josh, around turning around a long-standing employee or employees who may not be team players or collaborators. Any
yeah.
thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a tough one too, because again, you don't want to lose all the the institutional knowledge and their skill set and their experience and things, but sometimes you do. Sometimes turnover is not a bad thing. It's not always a bad thing. My usual approach, and I've had this a number of times. I know exactly what you're talking about, Hannah, and I've had this a number of times. But I just have an honest conversation with the person to find out. Sometimes it's not even anything to do with work. Sometimes they're just struggling with things outside of work, and so. But if it is inside of work, either way, my general approach is just to say to them, hey, you know, we seem to be not on the same page lately. You know what the expectations are. You know where we're headed with this, and what we're doing. So is this something like that you feel like you can no longer do? Because I have one example is that I had an instructor who was really strict on he had a policy about students who miss class at a community college where I worked, and that's just not who we were. Students were going to miss class. Not that we wanted them to do it a lot, but his was really, really harsh. And he'd been there for a long time. And I said, look, this is not the philosophy of the college. I understand it's your philosophy. My question is, do you think you have the ability to conform to our policy here? Because this is the expectation. This is the policy, and you're not following that right now. If so, then great. We can work with that, and I'll help you do that. If not, I understand. If you feel like, I have to hold this line, then this may not be the best fit for you anymore. And because the college has changed a little bit, things change, and you may need to look for a different opportunity. Maybe this isn't the right fit for you anymore. And that's a tough conversation to have, but really getting to the core of, what's the real issue here? Is the issue that they don't agree with the philosophy of the organization anymore, or is it something outside of work or something, and just trying to figure out, okay, and then an honest conversation about, is this something we can fix, or is it time for us to part ways, which is difficult, but sometimes necessary. So, yeah. But my best advice is an honest, straightforward conversation at that point. Yeah.
Oh, great information. Thanks so
Good
much for
question.
sharing, Josh. We really learned a
No,
lot today. So we sure
my
appreciate
pleasure.
your time and thanks for everyone who attended today. I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording, but
Yeah.
it will be available on the ELK YouTube site. So should you want to share it out or recap what you've learned here, then feel free to visit that website and review it.
Appreciate it, everybody. Have a great day. Enjoy the conference.